This video tutorial I will explain what is REST API and RESTful Web Services. First we will see what is API. API is nothing but Application Programming Interface. API is a piece of software using that two or more applications can communicate with each other. And currently all applications are connected because of API. Because of API, you can book Indigo air flight ticket from not only from their official website but also from PayPal, Paytm, GoIBO, etc. Because using API, the Paytm and PayPal can get flight details from Indigo server and display the price information and the availability, and from Paytm or PayPal, the user can book the tickets. Suppose say you want to build the weather report application which will display temperature of different regions across the India. So what we can do is we can install temperature sensor in a different region, but we have to spend lot of money and time. That is not good. So what we can do is already some third party company might have installed a temperature sensor in different regions of India, and they have data in their server. So what our weather report application can do is using API we can get the temperature data from the third party server and display the weather information in our weather report application. Here you can see the client, here you can see the server. Server is the one who has the data and client is the one who wants the data and use it in their application. So in order to get data from server, the client send request to the server. The server process the request and send the response back to the client. And because of API, the communication between these two applications are happening. The server sends a response back to the client. The response can be HTML or XML or JSON. Here you can see the example of HTML. Here you can see the example of XML, and here you can see the example of JSON. And for application to application communication, HTML is not good because it is difficult to parse and use it in the client application. We have to use XML or JSON for application to application communication. And compared to XML, JSON is easy to understand and it is fast. In case of REST API, the communication between client and server should follow some protocol or some rules and regulation or some standard. The REST API follows HTTP protocol or HTTPS protocol. HTTP protocol is not secured, but HTTPS protocol is secured. In case of HTTP protocol, it has network layer, transport layer, and application layer. In case of HTTPS protocol, it has network layer, transport layer, security layer, and application layer. There is one more protocol called SOAP protocol. It has a network layer, transport layer, security layer, application layer, and it has one more layer called SOAP. SOAP is the acronym for Symbol Object Access Protocol, and it is an XML based messaging protocol for exchanging structured information in the implementation of web services in computer networks. REST is a set of architectural constraints or styles. REST is not a protocol or REST is not a standard. REST is an acronym for Representational State Transfer. Here you can see the client and here you can see the server, and the server has resources. Suppose the client asks particular resource, then the server send representation of that particular resource. The resource will be there in the server, but server will send representation of that resource, and that is the reason you can see the word representational here. And state is nothing but at the particular point of time what is the value of each field, that will be sent it to the client. Over the period of time there is a possibility of this value of each key may be changed. And currently the mobile number is like this, and if user requests this particular resource, the user will get this particular mobile number. And there is a possibility after 2 months this mobile number may be changed to something else. And after 2 months, if client requests this particular resource, then the user will get updated mobile number. Using web services, mostly we will do CRUD operation. C for create the resource, R for read the resource or get the resource, U for update the resource, D for delete the resource. Now we will see what is API endpoint. API endpoint is the location from which APIs can access the resources. Here you can see the format of API endpoint. Protocol, then domain, then API, then resource path. Here you can see the example of API endpoints. HTTPS, which is protocol, then domain is www.google.com, then API, and here you can see the resource path, which is nothing but users. We are talking about user resources, and here you can see the resource path, user slash what, and here you can see resource path, which is users, then query parameter is limit equal to 20. From this API endpoint, it is not clear we are going to create the user or get the user or delete the user or we are going to update the user. That is not clear. So that is the reason we have HTTP method that will specify what action we are going to do. That we will see next. Here you can see different HTTP methods: post, get, put and delete. Post is used to create the resource, get is used to read or get the resource, put is used to update the resource, delete is used to delete the resource. And here you can see the API endpoint, and HTTP method is get. So what we are going to do is we are going to get list of users from the particular server, and which satisfy the first REST architectural constraint, which is nothing but uniform interface. So from this API endpoint only we will come to know we are talking about user resource, and from this HTTP method we know what action we are going to perform. In this case it is read operation or get operation. Suppose we want to create the user resource, then API endpoint will be like this, and HTTP method should be post, and in the body of the request we have to send this payload. The payload contains user information like email, first name, last name, etc. And once this request sent to the server create the resource, and it will assign some unique ID. In this case it is 123. Then server sends the HTTP status code 200 back to the client along with the created resource. Suppose we want to get the user resource whose ID is 123. Then API endpoint will be like this, and HTTP method should be get. And in the body of the request, we no need to send any payload. And once server receive the request, it will process it, and it will send the user resource which has ID 123. And along with that, it will send HTTP status code 200. Suppose I want to update the user resource, and the user ID is 123. Then API endpoint will be like this, and HTTP method we have to use put, and in the body we have to send the payload. The payload contains updated information, and once server receive the request, it will update the user resource details based on the unique ID 123. Then it will send HTTP status code 200 back to the client. Suppose I want to delete the user resource, and the user ID is 123. Then API endpoint will be like this, and HTTP method will be delete. Once server receives the request, it will delete the resource successfully, Then it will send HTTP status code 200 back to the client. And this is how the CRUD operations will be performed. Stateless web services. This is one of the RESTful architectural style. As per REST architecture, the RESTful web service should not keep client state on the server, and this restriction is called statelessness, which means each request from client to server is independent, and each request will not depend on the previous request because the server won't maintain the client state. Client and server, which is one of the RESTful architectural style. The client application and server application must be able to evolve separately without any dependency on each other, which means the client application can be developed separately and the server application can be developed separately. And the client application should only know the URL of the resource. Layered system, which is one of the RESTful architectural style. REST allows you to use layered system architecture where you can deploy API on server 1, store data on server 2 and authenticate request in server 3. This is how we can build layered system. Hashable. This is one of the RESTful architectural style. Every response should include whether the response is hashable or not and for how much duration the responses can be hashed at the client side. The client will return data from its hash for any subsequent request, and there would be no need to send request again to the server if the data is available in the hash for the particular duration of time. If your web service follows the RESTful architectural styles like uniform interface, stateless web services, client and server, layered system, and hashable, then your web service is RESTful web service. And RESTful web service is lightweight, maintainable, and scalable.
You can get the Java source code link from the description section of the video. To see the description in mobile, click on this icon and it will expand like this. Then click on this more button to see the description. And in the description, you can see the links. and click on these links to get the Java source code.